Well, hi, everyone. Good evening. I'm Faye Rosenfeld, and I am the Vice President of Public Programs here at the New York Public Library. Whether you are with us here in person or joining us online, I am so happy to welcome you to Live from NYPL. It is my great honor to introduce tonight's event with Ruth Franklin, Bill Goldstein, and the incomparable Joyce DiDonato. They're with us to celebrate the opening of two incredible new shows dedicated to Virginia Woolf. One at the Met Opera, with whom we are thrilled to be partnering this evening, and the other right here at the New York Public Library. Here at the library, next week, we're opening Virginia Woolf, A Modern Mind. The exhibition provides an intimate view of the author's life and creative process through her personal notebooks and diaries, family photographs, and unpublished letters. And it's drawn entirely from the holdings of the New York Public Library, which houses one of the most important collections of Virginia Woolf's writings in the world. It opens here on November 18th, and you can go to nypl.org to register for your free ticket. I will be bringing the show's curator, Carolyn Vega, up on stage to tell us more about it in just a minute. Until the show opens, you can also visit our Treasures exhibition, which also has some fascinating Virginia Woolf materials on display. Meanwhile, at the Metropolitan Opera, between November 22nd and December 15th, you can see The Hours, the world premiere production by Pulitzer Prize winning composer Kevin Putz and playwright and librettist Greg Pierce. The opera was adapted from Michael Cunningham's acclaimed novel, which in turn was inspired by Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway. The production will be conducted by Met Music director Yannick Nézet-Séguin. The New York Times has proclaimed The Hours to be New York City's opera event of the fall, so I encourage you all to reserve your tickets quickly. You can purchase them online at metopera.org. Mezzo-soprano Joyce DiDonato plays Virginia Woolf in The Hours, and we are extremely lucky to have her here tonight. She'll be speaking with Bill Goldstein, who was a Cullman Fellow here at the library and has written extensively on Virginia Woolf in his book, The World Broke in Two. Joyce will also be giving you a small taste of The Hours with a short performance at the end of tonight's event. And before that, author and critic Ruth Franklin will read from Virginia Woolf's letters and diaries from around the time that she began writing Mrs. Dalloway, which, of course, the original title, of which was, of course, The Hours. All of their very distinguished bios are in your programs, as well as a number of our upcoming events at Live from NYPL, so we really hope that you'll join us. Live from NYPL is made possible by the continuing generosity of Celeste Bartos, Manaz Isbahani Bartos, and Adam Bartos, and of course, by all of you, our wonderful supporters and friends near and far. Thank you for that support and for helping us bring all of this extraordinary programming to you for free. So, the library's exhibition, Virginia Woolf, A Modern Mind, was curated by our very own Carolyn Vega. Carolyn is the curator of the Henry W. and Albert A. Berg Collection of English and American Literature. She also put together the amazing one-night display of Woolf materials right at the entrance to the room that I hope you all had a chance to check out as you were coming in. If you didn't, it'll stick around for a few minutes after the show ends tonight. To help kick things off, I am thrilled to invite Carolyn up on stage to tell us more about the library's Virginia Woolf collections and the amazing exhibition that she's put together. So please silence your cell phones and then join me in welcoming Carolyn Vega.
All right, good evening. Thank you for being here tonight. So, Virginia Woolf was a multi-layered and deeply introspective person. She wrote books that are meditations on time passing, interiority, and change. She spent her creative life pushing the boundaries of literature, and her techniques were new, experimental, modern, and she's now acknowledged as one of the most important modernist writers of the 20th century. This is all a very long way to say that I think she would really enjoy tonight's event, a program based on an opera, based on a film, and a book based on her own work and life. The Hours, in all its forms, runs deep. For example, if you took sort of a soil core of The Hours, you'd find elements of Margaret Vaughan, who was Virginia Woolf's early love, transported to the late 1990s and reflecting on the AIDS pandemic. This kind of compression of themes, time, and character all resonates with Woolf's overarching goals. She wrote in stream of consciousness, on shifting perspectives, the expanse of time, and the nature of gender. Her work is also lyrical, which sometimes belies her experimental techniques, and together these can make her fiction challenging to access. And these are all reasons that The Hours is so exciting. Virginia Woolf, her characters, and her goals are brought to life. When Woolf died by suicide in 1941, she left behind complete manuscripts for all of her books, as well as notes and drafts for abandoned projects and works in progress. She was a passionate reader and a lifelong diarist. She'd filled dozens of notebooks with private jottings on literature, friends, the state of the world, the state of her mind. In the mid-1950s, her widower Leonard Woolf edited and published selections from her diaries and also began contemplating the disposition of his wife's archive. The Henry W. and Albert A. Berg collection of English and American literature at the New York Public Library began acquiring Woolf's papers in 1958. As part of the negotiations, the collection curator assured the book dealer that the diaries could be sent directly from England to a safe vault in this very building that only the library's director could access. I'm still trying to figure out where that was in this building. The library has continued to add to the Woolf collection, most recently through the support of philanthropist and book collector Susan Taine, and through the extraordinary gift in 2019 of the William Beekman collection of Virginia Woolf and her circle. It was important to Leonard Woolf that the Virginia Woolf collection of papers be kept together and made available for serious students. At the New York Public Library, this material is made available to researchers regardless of institutional affiliation. All you need is a research project and a library card. And next week, as Faye mentioned, we'll be making the collection even more accessible through a full gallery exhibition, Virginia Woolf, A Modern Mind. This is the first major exhibition of Woolf's writings at the library in 30 years, and it's drawn entirely from the library's holdings. For tonight, I pulled from the archive a selection of early drafts, diaries, and photographs that chart Woolf's development of Mrs. Dalloway and speak to the themes explored in The Hours. So in the case near the doors, as Faye mentioned, you'll see that nearly 20 years before Mrs. Dalloway was published in 1925, Clarissa Dalloway made a very brief appearance as a character in the earliest drafts of Woolf's first published novel. Woolf further developed the character of Mrs. Dalloway in a series of short stories, one of which she published in 1923. And the following year, she published an essay, Mr. Bennet and Mrs. Brown, in which she articulates her goal as a writer, which is to create believable characters, or a flesh and blood Mrs. Brown. And as you trace the early drafts leading up to Mrs. Dalloway, you'll see Woolf doing just this, creating a flesh and blood Clarissa Dalloway. Around the time that Mrs. Dalloway was published in 1925, Woolf was forming an intimate physical relationship with Vita Sackville West, and this important relationship, of course, comes to bear in The Hours as well. So after the program tonight, if you haven't had a chance, I hope you'll stop by the exhibition case to view these and other items, including one of the diaries that we'll be hearing an excerpt from later. And I hope you'll return to the library in the coming weeks or months to view the full exhibition, which includes many, many more unpublished letters, original manuscripts, intimate photographs, original dust jacket art, and so much more. So it'll be on view until March 5th, 2023, and admission is free. So coming up to the stage next is author and critic Ruth Franklin. She'll be reading from a short selection of letters and diary entries written by Virginia Woolf as she worked on Mrs. Dalloway, so as I mentioned, some of which you can see in the case. In the first letter, Woolf writes to her friend Gerald Brennan about the Hours, which would later be retitled Mrs. Dalloway. Brennan was a veteran of the First World War who left England to live and write in a remote Spanish village where Woolf visited him in 1923. Brennan was one of the inspirations, along with Woolf herself, for the character of Septimus Smith. And while working on developing this character in the manuscript the following year, Woolf jotted down in her notebook, why not have something of Gerald Brennan in him, the young man who has gone into business after the war, takes life to the heart, seeks truth revelations. Woolf's overarching goal was always to crystallize her character's innermost thoughts, to bring their reality, as she called it, to the page. So in these readings tonight, we see her grappling with how best to do this and reflecting upon her creative practice, her achievements, and her hope for literature. Please join me in welcoming Ruth Franklin.
Letter, May 13th, 1923. Here we are with our noses to the grindstone. The grindstone is made of innumerable books which have to be transubstantiated into precisely the right number of articles, containing the right sentiments, views, and facts, in the right number of words, at the right moment. This, not once, but weekly, every week, every month, every year, till all our precious time is over, and life, which surely has other uses, has poured in cataracts of printer's ink down the main gutter to the Thames. Perhaps the horror will mitigate. I've had only 4 days writing at my novel since I got back. Tomorrow, I say to myself, I shall plunge into the thick of it. But how does one make people talk about everything in the whole of life so that one's hair stands on end in a drawing room? How can one weigh and sharpen dialogue till each sentence tears its way like a harpoon and grapples with the shingles at the bottom of the reader's soul? Did we discuss dialogue at Yegan? I lose myself in metaphors when I begin to write, being dissipated, interrupted. Diary, June 19th, 1923. I took up this book with a kind of idea that I might say something about my writing, which was prompted by what Catherine Mansfeld said about her writing in The Dove's Nest. But I only glanced. She said a good deal about feeling things deeply, also about being pure, which I won't criticize, though of course I very well could. But now, what do I feel about my writing? This book, that is, The Hours, if that's its name. One must write from deep feeling, said Dostoevsky. And do I? Or do I fabricate with words, loving them as I do? No, I think not. In this book, I have almost too many ideas. I want to give life and death, sanity and insanity. I want to criticize the social system and to show it at work at its most intense. But here I may be posing. Am I writing The Hours from deep emotion? Of course, the mad part tries me so much, makes my mind squirt so badly that I can hardly face spending the next weeks at it. It's a question, though, of these characters. People, like Arnold Bennett, say I can't create characters that survive. I dare say it's true that I haven't that reality gift. I insubstantize, willfully to some extent, distrusting reality, its cheapness. But to go further, have I the power of conveying the true reality? Or do I write essays about myself? Answer these questions as I may, in the uncomplimentary sense, and still there remains this excitement to get to the bones. Now I'm writing fiction again. I feel my force glow straight from me at its fullest. I foresee, to return to the hours, that this is going to be the devil of a struggle. The design is so queer and so masterful. I'm always having to wrench my substance to fit it. The design is certainly original and interests me hugely. I should like to write away and away at it, very quick and fierce. Needless to say, I can't. In 3 weeks from today, I shall be dried up. Diary, April 20th, 1925, less than 1 month before the publication of Mrs. Dalloway. Happiness is to have a little string onto which things will attach themselves. For example, going to my dressmaker in Judd Street, or rather thinking of a dress I could get her to make, and imagining it made. That is the string, which, as if it dipped loosely into a wave of treasure, brings up pearls sticking to it. She has no string dipping into the green wave. Things don't connect for her and add up into these entrancing bundles, which are happiness. And my days are likely to be strung with them. I like this London life in early summer, the street sauntering and square haunting. And then, if my books were to be a success, if we could begin building at Monk's and put up wireless for Nellie and get the Skates to live at Shank's cottage, if. What will happen is some intensities of pleasure, some profound plunges of gloom, bad reviews, being ignored, and then some delicious clap of compliment. But really, what I should like would be to have £3 to buy a pair of rubber-soled boots and go for country walks on Sundays. One thing, in considering my state of mind now, seems to me beyond dispute, that I have, at last, bored down into my oil well and can't scribble fast enough to bring it all to the surface. I have now at least 6 stories welling up in me, and feel, at last, that I can coin all my thoughts into words. Not but what an infinite number of problems remain, but I have never felt this rush and urgency before. I believe I can write much more quickly, if writing it is. This dash at the paper of a phrase, and then the typing and retyping, trying it over, the actual writing being now like the sweep of a brush. I fill it up afterwards. Now, suppose I might become one of those interesting, I will not say great, but interesting novelists. Oddly, for all my vanity, I have not until now had much faith in my novels or thought them my own expression.
Hello.
Oof, that's intense. Gloriously intense. Hello.
Hello. So, I mean, we've now heard a lot from Virginia Woolf, but now we will hear from Virginia Woolf of the Metropolitan Opera. So for those people who don't know much about The Hours, or maybe haven't read it or seen the movie, I thought we could start with telling a little bit about the story of the Hours, and then how you became involved with The Hours. So the story of the opera and the story of your involvement in it.
Yeah, fortuitous, wonderful gift. The Hours is quite simple. It takes place in a single day, like Marriage of Figaro, but in 3 different settings. 1923 in London, or a suburb of London, Richmond, which is Virginia's world. 1949, which is where Laura Brown is a housewife with a young son named Richie. And she is dying a slow death internally because she feels imprisoned where she is, and she's trying to connect to her son and can't. Her escape is reading Mrs. Dalloway. Virginia's day is trying to find the first sentence to her novel, to begin her novel. And 1999, I think, Clarissa Vaughan, and she is planning a party for her ex-lover and best friend, Richard, who's dying of AIDS. He's a novelist, and she wants to have a dinner party where he's given a prize. And it's about these 3 stories of women that are deeply creative, deeply stuck. And as the hours go on, you find how their stories weave together. And if you've not seen the movie, I don't want to tell you yet. I want you to experience it. But it's woven in a genius way.
And so when were you first approached about playing Virginia Woolf or becoming involved in this opera? When, I mean, it's premiering now, I mean, or this year, next, in a few weeks, but when did it begin the process?
I don't remember, because my sense of time after COVID is a little bit, it was like 1967. It feels like it. It was a few years ago. I know that Renee Fleming, who is singing Clarissa Vaughan, she and Kevin Putz, who is the wonderful composer of this piece, they were wanting to create an opera together, and she had come up with the idea of The Hours, and he just went, that's brilliant. And she took it to Mr. Gelp at the Metropolitan Opera probably about 4 years ago. And Renee says, to her surprise, but please, that Mr. Gelp said yes. Of course he said yes. Renee saying, I have an idea for an opera, yes. And it started into development. And it's, I'm sure for Kevin and Greg Pierce, who's the librettist, that's a job, being the libretto for this. I think they've lived with this for a long time, but I've really had the score for about a year. And this has been really like building up just for me in the last year.
And so when you have an opera like this that's new, that's obviously never been done before, and what is the process of working with the composer on the material being written for your voice, but maybe for a voice inside the composer's head that is or is not related to Joyce DiDonato's voice?
Well, I knew Kevin's music, and I'd never met him, and I actually had not discussed anything with him, but knowing his vocal writing, I didn't have a doubt. I thought I'm in good hands. And if Renee is on board, I'm going to assume I'm also in good hands because of that. And I received the score, and within the first few pages, I went, oh, okay, he knows what he's doing, And I could even see Renee's lines, and I could hear her voice already. And Kelly O'Hara, who's up here, I could hear these voices already, not even knowing what the piece sounded like. And they were able to do this in concert in Philadelphia in the spring. I was supposed to be a part of that, but that was a COVID fatality, and it got rescheduled, and I couldn't participate. So I came to this sort of as the last diva running. But when they made some changes after that, and I dove into the score this summer. And then I worked up the nerve to write to Kevin because I was a bit in awe of what he'd written. And I said, I think it's amazing. And he said, if you have anything, let me know. And I just went through the score, and there was nothing really, anything to really change other than, Kevin, I think if I added this or I elongated that, I think I could work some magic. It's like I feel like it wants to do this in my voice. And he was so open and wonderful. And so I inputted a little bit, but really what he has created is something so extraordinary. And it's a gift to be a part of it and to be helping in part of the creative process.
So how do you approach a role based on a real person? I mean, Renee Fleming and Kelly O'Hara are singing fictional characters, and Virginia Woolf is a fictional character within the hours, but is there a different way you approach that as opposed to other roles that you've done other roles based on real life people, but you've also created roles that are not based on real life people.
Yeah,
so.
I think, Mary Stuart and Sister Helen Préjean and Virginia Woolf. So different centuries, sort of, and titanic women. I think my approach, which is perhaps a bit unconventional or unorthodox, is I don't really go to the original source material too much, because Sister Helen was a bit of an exception in a way, because so much of the words I was singing are her words directly from her novel and from her real life experience. It was slightly more realistic, but I didn't meet her, and I didn't sort of do a deep dive into Sister Helen until after the premiere. And with Virginia, she's such an iconic figure, and we have her words, and we have her world, which was, just so beautiful hearing those read out loud. But that's not necessarily the world of the hours that Kevin and Greg have made. And so my first point of entry is the music and the text in the context of this piece. And what I find for myself, the kind of performer I am, it makes me not feel like I'm already putting on an expected costume and an expected way. We all have an idea of what Virginia must have been like. And if I start from that point, I always feel like I'm a cheap imitation, and I'm always falling a little bit short. And when I'm on stage, I need to feel like I own what is happening. I don't want to feel like I'm imitating somebody. And the beautiful thing of this score, of the composition, and how Greg has distilled the text of the hours and brought in Mrs. Dalloway in such a precise, clear way for an opera, which is a very different medium than for a film or a play, is that you need the text, but then you need the space for the music to fill in the blanks, which is, I think, what we love as audience members, is we love to be invited to the party and say, I want to think what she's thinking, and I want to be inside her head. And if everything's concrete, there's not as much space for you to enter as an audience member. And I think, we'll find out on November 22nd, but my sense, my very, very strong intuition and sense about this is that they have found this pacing where I have so much to say. I'm like Virginia, I have so many thoughts in my head.
That's why we're here.
How much time do we have? Where time is sort of expanded. And this doesn't, for example, in the film, you don't really get this because it's next scene, scene, scene. we have these moments where we feel like we're inside Virginia's head or Clarissa's head, and we get to swim around in it for a while, this glorious place of confusion or regret or madness or sorrow. And they sort of force us to be in that place a little bit with this score, which is, from my experience of watching these scenes and being the music, is at times nearly unbearable because of what these women are grappling with in this single day. But the music is crafted in such a way that it sort of embraces you and say, I know, but I've got you. I know it hurts, but I've got you. And I'll give you an example. We've been layering in this piece, and it's a massive, proper, grand opera for this little intimate story. I mean, there's 18 characters, there's something like 30 scenes, there's a full chorus, there's a child soloist who, I've told his mom I'm going to kidnap him at the end. He's extraordinary. Kai Edgars, he's amazing. And 3 other children in it. There's dancers. It's just a massive piece. And we've been layering it little by little. And when the chorus joined us about 2.5 weeks into the process, they were downstairs, and they've been studying their part, which I think to them didn't quite make too much sense. They didn't quite know how they fit into the piece, and they were trying to find their way. And they were joining us at our first orchestra rehearsal the next day, our Sitzprobe. And I pulled a couple of them aside, and I said, you guys aren't ready. They said, oh, well, we can't wait to hear it. Like, I'm sure the music's going to be great. I said, you're not ready. Because all of that vulnerability and rawness and insecurity and truth that Virginia is trying to find in her novels, I'm finding in this opera. And it's like the real truth, the one that we shudder from ourselves a lot of the times, but certainly to the outside world. And that's what all 3 of these women are trying to find their way through. And we were in the Sitzprobe just for the second act. They hadn't even heard the first act yet. And they're behind me, just weeping and crying. And afterwards, one of the wonderful soloists told me that afternoon, he said, I left that rehearsal and I went to the people in the building that I love, and I told them, I love you. He said, I was compelled to say that after this thing. Because the space that is allowed in these women's stories, where it's not just narrative, but we go into that sweet spot that music gives us, it connects person to person, human to human, and holds your hand while you walk through the fire of what these women are living. And I'm not sure, I have no idea what the question was and where I went with that. But like I said, there's so much to say. But this expanded time is something really miraculous about this piece.
Well, and things happen simultaneously in music that can't happen simultaneously on the page, as near to that as Michael Cunningham tries to come, and as near as Virginia Woolf tried to come in the simultaneity of Clarissa Dalloway's story, Septimus Smith. I mean, they still have to be divided by page breaks or by paragraphs, and you don't have the kind of parallel lives or scenes or music
It's still sequential, and what we get to do in the opera is layer. I'll set it up a little bit later, but for example, there's a moment where Virginia's writing the first lines, which is, I think, something we can speak about, but writing the first lines, and in comes Laura Brown in 1949, and she's reading it for the first time, and we can be in duet together. And that is something that is the same words, the same harmonic world, but 2 different emotional worlds. And Virginia's trying to find the way to create this, and Laura's trying to find the way to escape it. And it becomes so deliciously complex and multi-layered. So this is something that the operatic, the musical world affords that a film or a novel doesn't. You still have to turn the page.
I mean, that moment, I mean, I saw the concert version, so obviously I didn't have any sense of how it was happening on the stage because people are just standing there. But the simultaneous sadness of knowing that Virginia Woolf is struggling with this, and yet the happiness, despite Laura Brown's own sadness, that 25 years after this, the book is finished, it's out there in the world, and yet you know that in the time that has passed, Virginia Woolf has also committed suicide. I mean, so it's so many layers, I mean, to use that word, of emotion beyond even the story, because most people in some way are bringing some impression, I mean, whether it's researched or not, about who Virginia Woolf was, or, I mean, it's like Sylvia Plath. The one thing people might know about her is that she committed suicide, and that colors so much of how we think of a person, even though in this book, or in this opera, we're seeing her create rather than...
See, that's the fiction of the piece, because also they have the liberty, as following Michael Cunningham's novel as well, but they have the flexibility to bring in, you know, the thoughts of entering a river, taking a stone, and so they get to merge the full picture of Virginia into this single day. And it becomes quite complex, because also Laura Brown, I mean, I don't want to give too many spoilers, but she's thinking maybe one way to face my life is to end it. And the idea of knowing Virginia's story and having Mrs. Dalloway in her hands and reading this, she starts to explore that option. And it's the beauty of it across the time. This is what art does so sublimely, is we see ourselves in these stories. And there can be deep comfort found in that, saying, I thought I was the only one that felt that. And knowing that you have not been alone, or that somebody else on the planet has experienced something, there can be comfort in that.
And I mean, we're talking about Virginia Woolf, and obviously that's the part you play, but part of the story, as we've said, is set in the present day, and it's about AIDS, or relatively the present day. Is that hard for you to sort of be singing through an opera that in some way is a history of your own time and your own life? I mean, it's like, I find it hard sometimes to read historical novels, which are now being published, set in the 80s, and I think, how could my own lifetime be the subject of a historical novel? But I'm just wondering about your experience of AIDS and people you knew who may have been ill with AIDS or may have died from AIDS. Is that part of your experience of this opera, even though it's segmented away from your own story in it?
Yeah, it's not her world in this case. It is every element of this piece feels deeply personal and poignant, and I know there will be a segment of the population that walked through that and lived through it and lost so much through that period. And that story has not been told on the stage of the Metropolitan Opera before. And I think that's really important. And I think it's time. I was going to say it's overdue, but, you know, things arrive when they're meant to arrive. I think that's really important, because so much of this city, and the world, of course, but so much of this city was built and lost so much in the AIDS crisis. But of course, we've just survived another, well, we're in the mid, I don't know how I'm supposed to phrase this. Right. We are still in the throes of trying to understand what the last 2.5 years have been, with a lot of loss. I mean, we were just, before we were talking about Terrence McNally, right, who was one of the incredible leaders, and out from the very beginning lost so many beloved people in his life, thankfully survived right, that period, but we lost him in March of 2020 to a different virus. Right. That's deeply raw for me, because he was a dear friend, and oh, my God, he would have loved to have seen this on the stage. But at the same time, there's Laura Brown, who I understand that storyline very much, that she is trying to find a way to choose her life and not knowing how to do it. But at the same time, we're looking at today where there's a big faction that wants to put people back in that kitchen without a choice. Nothing wrong with being in a kitchen, but to demand that that's where you belong and you don't have choices. And that is as alive today as it was in 1949. Maybe even more so because we should have learned our lesson. So that I don't quite comprehend yet. And you've got Virginia, a woman, as a novelist in a man's world, you know, and trying to make her voice heard and trying, you know, she has to ask for permission to go out for a walk. Okay. And was it really mental illness or was it a creative superpower that just, you know, kept having to be contained, you know? What if she'd been able to really unleash it, you know? And so every sentence in this opera rings true, and I feel I have a personal connection to. I mean, Clarissa at the very beginning, she's like, no, I have to get the flowers, and I've got to get the chairs for the party, and she's in total denial of what's really happening in her life. She can't stop to just be quiet and hear the people around her. I might identify with that too. I'm not saying necessarily, but you know, this is why this piece feels like such a gift, because I'm pretty sure everybody that attends is going to see themselves on that stage.
And when you're doing a new opera, and then you'll go back to doing operas like Agrippina, which you had sung at the Met just before the pandemic, I mean, does working on a new opera with the composer, the preparation that you have to do for that you've described, does that influence then how you go back to, you know, classic roles or roles that have been sung for hundreds of years, or Mozart or you know, Donizetti? I mean, does doing something new shape how you go back to familiar operas?
That's such a great question. Doing something new in opera is absolutely terrifying and exhilarating and extraordinary. And I had the great fortune of going through the Houston Grand Opera studio in the late 90s, Clarissa Vaughan time. And David Gockley was running the company, and he was just celebrated at Opera America for their 50th anniversary. He premiered 45 operas during his tenure at the Houston Grand Opera, which is extraordinary. And so my 2 years as a young artist, and then my third year I was invited back, I was doing a premiere each year. Jackie O by Michael Dougherty, Little Women by Mark Adamo, and then I was starring in Resurrection by Todd Machover. And it's very funny. I was young and knew everything at the time, and I was like, well, these pieces, and these people, it's not like Mozart, and you know, I was all like this. And what was extraordinary is when I dove into it, and there was no recording to listen to, there was nobody saying, this is how that goes. It was just the Wild West, in a way. I had to look at the score, and I had to figure it out. And it was so liberating that it's the only way then, from the beginning of my career, I ever learned a role. I wouldn't listen to recordings until I'd already spent time at the piano and found it myself. I've asked all kinds of questions about why is it a major or minor, why is there an appoggiatura, why is it a dotted rhythm, what does that mean, how does that marry with the subtext and the text? And I can't imagine doing it any other way, because otherwise you just are regurgitating the way it goes. And I think that's a death knell for any art form, is to just say this is how it goes and to not examine it. And so, you know, I've been able to be a part of a number of premieres that were really powerful. I think this one is, wow, it's at the top of the list. And I really can't wait for you all to hear it, experience it, actually. And it's liberating and terrifying, because we hope you like it.
Well, so when you are doing this, I mean, you were rehearsing it and you were working with the score for about a year, you said. What happens when you get on the stage? I mean, you were talking about the Sitzprobe and the emotion that came there, but then what happens when it's actually becoming a performed piece on a stage, as opposed to the more, I mean, it's still a lot of work, but almost the more abstract idea of what's happening, because it's only happening in a small room?
If it's a good piece, there's a moment where you stop to be aware that you're singing. And if you're prepared as well, that's important. There becomes this shift that all of a sudden it's just happening in the only way it can happen. And it's the most organic, perfect way that this story, this moment, this thought can be expressed. And it's the only option in that moment. And so it doesn't feel like you're performing, it doesn't feel like you're singing, it just is alive. And that's exhilarating. Renee, I love being able to say Renee. Renee came up to me today on stage, and we'd added lights for the first time. So, I mean, everybody's terrified. We don't feel we have enough time. We all, you know, is it going to be ready? Are we going to get it? And it's this exciting, amazing, extraordinary thing. But each day we're adding something different. And today the lights arrived on stage. And it's a set where the three different worlds sort of move in and out of each other. And it's felt like a big warehouse in the studio and then on stage the last couple of days. And all of a sudden the lights come on and we're like, oh, I'm in Richmond, London. Like, I'm here. Like, the set comes alive, and there's Kelly in her kitchen baking a cake. And it just, all of a sudden, you're in the world. And you also feel that it, like, Phelim, our director, came up today, and he's like, it's working. and he says it very quietly. I probably shouldn't have said that. You know, but I'm not superstitious about this piece. I'm just not. I'll still not. And there's this, from the beginning, we've just felt like it's here, but now each thing starts to bring it into focus, and where it was maybe two-dimensional, now it's three-dimensional, and maybe we'll be in the fifth dimension by the time you all arrive, maybe.
And is it any different for you in the performance, in the acting, in the singing, when you are singing in the language that is the vernacular of the audience? I mean, you're singing in English. Do you have to approach the text in any kind of different way from when you are singing in Italian or French, or is it more immediate to you in some way, or not?
Yes, it shouldn't be. I mean, the goal is that whatever I'm singing in will feel immediate and completely organic. But of course, I'm a native English speaker. We want you to get every word without looking at the things, but it's opera. It's not always possible. And sometimes, you know, especially in the case of Virginia, sometimes I feel like it's more important to paint with the color. There's a lot of time you get a little bit of mania with her in this piece, and a little bit of the despondency, and the very almost harsh, matter-of-fact way where she's about to work and leave me alone. She's a little bit brusque. And so I also, sometimes it's a calculated thing, like if they don't get that word, they're going to get the emotion because of the color. And I tend, text is paramount for me. I really, 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 really think it's important. But at the end of the day, I almost feel like I am more of a painter than a singer. I like the color, and I want it to like wash over
So when you talk about the emphasis on the text, I'm curious about when you are planning recitals and because you have a number of thematic recordings that you've done that are based on recitals. And so is that a way of painting, even though you're singing? I mean, can you talk a little bit about the preparation of those recitals and what you're struggling with, just as Virginia Woolf is in this opera, struggling with the words?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think it sounds a little bit silly to say, but I like to consider myself a bit of a storyteller.
I think we've seen you are.
Well, and I want people to be carried away, whether they're coming to an opera or a recital or a concert, and I want to attempt to take them from a starting point to an ending point that then they can continue when they go home and think about. And so, yeah, I like, that's important for me, so that I have some cohesion and there's a thread being woven through things that I'm doing, very much like this piece. Ideally making people feel good when they leave. I know we're getting close to the time. I want to share one other thing that happened in rehearsal on my first day, which I think is kind of extraordinary considering that her writings are right over there. I mean, that's freaky, right? Extraordinary is the whole opening scene, which is part of what we're going to perform for you next. The morning starts, and she had the remnants of a first line, and then she forgot it. And she's trying to get it back, and also trying to test it out. And does she, once you have that first sentence, it's there. And it's a long, drawn-out scene where, in this production, the desk and the pen are simultaneously sort of threatening her and pulling her in. And it's this exhilaration and torment all at the same time. I think there's a few writers in the room. I don't know if that's accurate, but I'm going to guess it's possible. And Phelan McDermott, our wonderful director, who's taken such great care with this piece, we were playing with this. That pen is like a dagger on the desk, and she's repelled and pulled. And he said, here's the thing. If that first line doesn't get written, none of us are here in this room. And that's pretty extraordinary, because you think, yeah, but that was Virginia Woolf, and it's an important novel. But it's true for any human life. That one sentence you utter or gesture you make to somebody, it continues on and on and on. And this is an extraordinary example. Michael Cunningham, for example, tells the most amazing thing. I asked him about how Mrs. Dalloway came in. I hope I get his story right, but basically he was in love with this older girl at his school, and he was kind of stalking her, and he finally got enough nerve to come up and sort of go, hey, hey, hey. And she looked at him, and she just basically said, have you ever tried being less stupid? Have you ever tried reading Woolf? This lady said this. So again, a woman and he went to the library, and the only Woolf in the library was Mrs. Dalloway. It had never been checked out, and he checked it out. So that first sentence, right, gave birth to so many things. So I find this just like, man, write the sentence. Just write it. Say the word, and just get on with your life.
Well, we have to end with the first sentence, I guess, because now we're going to hear the music. So thank you very much for all of this. I wanted... I'll send you a list of the rest of my questions, and you can answer them by email. But I'm looking forward to the 22nd. I have tickets for that for the opening night. But I wanted to say, so now we're going to have a performance, a wonderful treat. Joyce is going to sing the first part, an excerpt from the first act, with accompanying her will be, I want to be sure to pronounce the names correctly, excuse me. Sydney Mancasola will be singing the role of Laura Brown, the housewife that Joyce is talking about, and that's the role that will be sung by Kelly O'Hara, but Sydney is the cover for Laura Brown, and they performed this last week or 2 weeks ago at the Guggenheim, and I know how beautiful it will sound. And then accompanying them on the piano is a Met assistant conductor named Dimitri Dover, who will be playing the piano. So thank you, Joyce DiDonato.
Shall I set it up just briefly?
Oh, yes, say a little. Well,
so
I thought you...
This is just, we're actually sort of piecing this together. When you come to the opera, it'll be fleshed out a little bit more. There's some choral interruptions and interventions that we've cut to present this. But this is Virginia's getting very close to that first sentence, and she's imagining all different kinds of things, and she's just thinking, you know, if I can just get that, I haven't failed yet, I get this first sentence. And you'll hear a moment where Laura joins, and she's reading it for the first time. And there's a back and forth between each of their reactions and their hopes for this and the experience of that first page of Mrs. Dalloway.
So here we are, and here you will be. Thank you.
She feels it inside her, that indescribable second self, that bright and nameless sparrow self. If she were religious, dear God, she is not, she would call it a soul-mockish word. What a lark, embarking on what might be a very good day, ready to walk. What will she scribble? Could be anything. She may pick up her pen and watch it glide across the page, watch in wonder as goods arrive, clocks and chocolates and dear, what on Septimus not clouds. Oh, Mrs. Dalloway, someone will die.